Hello artists, welcome back to the art room. This week we have part 2 of our landscape lesson. Last week we looked at artist Jen Aranyi and her beautiful landscapes. And this week we're going to be adding color to the ones that we drew last week. So pull out your black and white drawing from last week. If you missed it, you can always go into the archived lessons and find last week's lesson and do a drawing super quick. This week we're going to be adding color, and you get a choice of supplies. You can use your crayons, you could use your colored pencils. If you have watercolor, this is a beautiful project for that. I'm going to add a new supply in this week and show you how to use it. We're going to be looking at chalk as well. So there's different kind of chalks, just regular sidewalk chalk. You might see a little box of chalk like this, or this is actually the kind of soft pastel, or chalk pastel, I'm sorry, that we would use at school if you happen to have that. This is from one of the chalk art festivals that we have here in town, so you might have something like that at home too. But like I said, regular sidewalk chalk will work. Grab those supplies, come on back, and we'll get started. All right, artists, we're ready to get started adding color. Really quick, I just wanted to mention that next weekend is Valentine's Day. So if you're looking for a Valentine project to go along with a gift or just to surprise someone, I just wanted to throw out there that these would make really fun Valentine cards or Valentine pictures. And remember, Miss Aranyi had a leaf I showed you last week that had a fall scene inside of it. Thought that could be kind of cool with a landscape and a heart. Even just adding some of the techniques we're going to use with colors inside a heart, maybe some black and white design around the edge, would be really neat. So just keep that in mind as you're working through the project today. Maybe this is something you can add for Valentine's Day too. All right, let's talk a little bit about our supplies. This week I'm going to be showing you on my artwork from last week, I'm going to be showing you 4 different techniques. We're going to be using colored pencils, crayons, chalk, and watercolor. Since you probably have one of those supplies that you're interested in learning about, you get to fast forward my lesson to when I talk about that supply. I'm going to be sharing some new things about each of these supplies this week, so you really do want to stop and listen, but you don't have to listen to all of them. So when I come, like for example, when I get to colored pencils, I'll show this on the screen for just a moment, so if you're fast forwarding, you know, oh, it's time for colored pencils, I can stop. And you can watch that section only, okay? All right, so as we get started, you can fast forward to the section that you need. If you want to watch all of them, that'd be great. Remember, I always love seeing your artwork, so if you have time, I would love to see it. And let's get started. The cool thing about colored pencils is that they blend together really well. So you can overlap them a little and it looks great. One thing that you're going to need to decide as you get started is, are you going to start with a like sunrise, sunset, warm color palette, or are you going to go with a nighttime color palette and something in cool colors? So we've taught before, warm colors are things like red, yellow, and orange. Cool colors are blues and purples. And this will just give you a different effect. So maybe each one you want to do a little different. You could do one with colored pencils that are cool colors. You could do one with warm. Since I've demonstrated a cool one here, or a warm one, I'm going to do a cool one this time. All right, let me tell you a little bit about how we're going to blend our colored pencils together. I grabbed my 2 blues and purple that were in my crayon box. You probably have something similar in yours. And we're going to start with our lightest color. If you notice right here along the mountains, there's almost this glowing effect. If you think about it, when you see a sunrise or a sunset even, a lot of times it will seem like the horizon's glowing because the sun is just starting to rise up. But even at night, if you're going to see any lighter color, it's generally going to be on the horizon. So in order to make our background really pop, we're going to start with our lightest color. All right, I'm going to use my colored pencils up here on this one to demonstrate. But you see how I went around the mountains with my lightest color first? Okay, so you can do something similar to that too. I'm going to start with my lightest color. So I'm adding my lightest color around the edges of the trees. Okay, these trees are different than mountains. So if I were doing mountains, this is how I would go around them, and I would keep my mountains completely clear. Because this one's just trees and you would be able to see through the branches, I'm going to lightly bring my color down behind the trees a little. Not too much because I still like this black and white effect, but I'm going to bring it back just a little. So see how I did a lighter value here? Again, if you're using mountains, you want to just keep it white, so don't worry about that part. All right, so I've gone across the edges and I've added this light blue. Now I'm going to take my next darker color, which in my case I think is going to be blue. I mean, it and purple look pretty similar. I'm going to come back in and I'm going to add the next color. A lot of times in the sky, you'll see these kind of wisps of clouds or these patches of light and darkness. I think about the northern lights, the aurora borealis, when I see this too, how it kind of tends to come in these lines. So I'm kind of just adding a few of these lines. I'm not doing a straight segment of different colors. That's great if you're doing something kind of two-dimensional, but if you're wanting something to look a little more natural, then you want to add some variation. So notice I have a pattern going here. Now I'm going to grab my darker purple and I'm going to come in with purple behind it. You might notice at the moment that my colors are all staying pretty light. I'm doing something called laying my colors in. I'm kind of blocking them in, deciding where I want them to go. Can make little adjustments as I need. And then I can go back now and I'm going to press down a little more and I'm going to add some variation, some value to this purple color. And maybe I'll still leave some of it a little light and some of it a little darker. I'm also letting my colors overlap, and that's the great thing about colored pencils. This wouldn't work with crayons. It would work somewhat with watercolors, but you run the risk of it starting to look muddy. But because colored pencils are so kind to each other when they blend, they have less oil, less mixing to them, they tend to overlap without turning muddy. If this were paint, we would have to be careful that we weren't making brown spots on our paper. I don't know, you guys have probably experienced that, where you mix some colors on your paper and you're like, why did this just turn brown, that yellowy color? All right, and I would just keep going back. Whoa, that got really dark really quick. I would keep going back and adding in my color. If you accidentally get darker than you mean to go, let it work with you. Let it work for you. You can see how we're starting to have some depth added. I'm never taking my dark colors all the way down to my trees, but I am adding them right up against them, letting my colors overlap. You guys get the idea. I kind of like for my edges to be dark too. I think it helps the viewer's eye come down into the picture. So over here you can see that I let my purple and my red overlap a little, and it did muddy just a tiny bit, but not too much. All right, there's colored pencil. So you would go in to each of your 4 squares. You would add colors. You can use warm and cool. You can mix it up on different ones. You'll add your color in. You'll block in your colors, then you'll come back and you'll add some dark and some light to add variation in your colors, just like how the night sky has some light spots and some dark spots in them. All right, and if you're interested, if you have a favorite, this is what we would do in the classroom together. I would have you choose your favorite color or your favorite picture frame that you made here, cut it out and mount it on black paper. This is a little different. So a frame is something that sits on top of your paper, but mounting is when you set your paper on top of the black, the background. So you could mount your paper to a piece of black, even another color. If you're gonna do something for Valentine's, that would look really good if you cut it out and then mounted it on top of your black paper. All right, I look forward to seeing what you come up with. See you next week. All right, we're ready for crayons now. All right, crayons are really fun to work with on this kind of project because they do have some blending capabilities together, which is kind of cool. That also means we have to be careful that we don't end up with a muddy color. We've talked in the past about the color wheel, about how warm and cool colors, colors that are analogous or side by side on the color wheel, tend to go together really well and not turn a muddy, browny, yellow, greeny color. But if you start to grab colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, you're going to start to get some of these muddy colors. So we're going to kind of keep our colors into warm or cool colors. That way we stay more in the analogous range. But you will notice here I used warm colors, yellow, red, and orange. I went back and added a cool purple over the top, and I started to get this muddy look in here. Purple has more blue in it, and blue and red and yellow, if you mix them all together, are going to make something close to black, a really, really dark color. So because I introduced purple that had blue to my yellows and reds, I started to get this muddy color. So just a word of warning, and so you know why that happens sometimes. All right, let's go down. We're going to take one of our sections, and I'm going to demonstrate with our colors. Here I used warm colors. This could be a sunrise or a sunset. You could use cool colors, which would be more like a nighttime view. I'm going to do, since I did warm colors up here, I'm going to demonstrate cool colors for this one. All right, so I pulled out my blue. I used as many shades as I could find in my box. So I have two different blues and a purple. All right, we're going to start with our lightest color. If you'll notice in Miss Aranyi's artwork quite often, and in my sample here, my lightest color goes up against the hills in my landscape. Think to what it looks like at sunrise and sunset. Generally that light sky, the first bit of lightness or that last bit of lightness if it's sunset, is right along the horizon line. And even at night, if you're outdoor and you're looking at the sky, quite often the horizon's going to be the lightest thing around you. So we're going to start with our lightest color around the horizon. I'm going to simply go around my mountain, kind of outlining it with a thick band, this lightest color. Notice that I'm not making just straight lines of color. It's not very natural. If you think about a sunset or a sunrise, if there's clouds in the sky, it kind of streaks the sky in these lines that go off in diagonals in these different directions. It's not just straight across. So sometimes when we first start drawing landscapes, we're tempted to say, this is my blue line, this is my red line, this is my whatever, and we make these kind of stripes in the sky. But if you think about it, it's really more loose than that. It's a little more, that's called organic, not quite these straight lines. So I've kind of made my highlight here, my lightest color, this big band across my hills. Now I'm going to go in with what I think would be my next lightest color. So I'm going to use my darker blue, and I'm going to start to add these wisp in the sky. Notice this isn't a straight line. I'm not making a straight line across here and coloring in a whole section. I'm just adding blue. I'm letting it go up a little higher and back down, because this mimics a little bit more what nature and the sky would do. I'm also coming down into my lighter blue with my dark blue. I want to keep my lightest blue right against the hill, so I'm not coming down too far with my dark blue, just a little. I'm starting to let them blend a little bit. All right, so I've got that kind of laid in. I'm blocking in my colors right now, and then I'm going to add my purple. A little purple here, a little purple down the middle. Because all of these colors share the same background, if you've done color mixing before, you know that blue is in purple, right? It's one of the two primary colors that make purple. These colors should blend without creating this muddy look because they're close to each other on the color wheel. In fact, purple is right next to blue on the color wheel. They're analogous. All right, so now that I have them lightly blocked in, I'm going to start adding value. That means the lightness or darkness of a color. So I'm going to come back in, I'm going to add some darker purple. I'm just pressing down more. I'm not going to make it all the same dark. I'm going to add some darkness to some areas and keep it light in others. This is adding interest to your picture. This is helping the viewer's eye look around your picture to the different sections that are darker and lighter. That draws the viewer's eye. Letting them overlap just a little bit. Let's go in with a darker blue. I also tend to want to make my darker colors around the edges of my picture, which I think just helps with that glowing effect. If there's a really dark, bold color around the top corners, just adds to the fact that those hills are glowing in the background. You'll find that some of these places where they overlap will be even darker. All right, and you guys will keep going with this. You'll color in all four of your pictures. You don't have to stick to just cool colors. You could do one cool, one warm. You could try mixing them. Just be careful for this muddy part. Don't let those colors overlap if they're not analogous or side by side on the color wheel. And there you have it. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with your night sky or your morning sky. Make sure to send me a picture. Oh, let me show you one other thing as well. If you wanted to, this is if we were in the classroom together, I would have you choose your favorite when you were done, and then I would have you mount it. And by mounting, I just mean this is a black square of paper, and I've put the picture on top and glued it down. Framing would mean that you take something and you put it around your picture. Mounting means that you take your picture and you put it on something else. So this would be mounting. I think it's really kind of a nice little finished look to your artwork. You don't have to do this, it's just a thought. But especially if you're gonna make something for Valentine's, if you wanted to cut your heart out and then mount it on another colorful piece of paper, it doesn't have to be black to give, that would just make it look really cool, I think. So just an idea. All right, I can't wait to see what you guys come up with. Please share your artwork if you have time. Happy Valentine's Day, and I'll see you next week. All right, let's talk chalk. I mentioned already that there were different kinds of chalk. There's the pastel chalk that has a little bit more color pigment to it, and then there's the kind of chalk that we would use either on a blackboard or on our sidewalk. I'm going to demonstrate both to you. They both look very different, they act a little different, but it's kind of the same idea. So the first thing we're going to think about when we look at our landscape is what colors we're going to use. So remember, the color wheel is divided into cool colors and warm colors. Cool colors being blue and purple and green. Warm colors being red and orange and yellow. This is important in using some certain supplies or medium because they'll blend together, and if you blend the wrong colors together, it will begin to look muddy. Maybe that's happened if you used watercolor or paint. If you blend the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, you're going to get a brown or almost a black looking color. It's not going to happen quite as much with chalk as it will with watercolor or with crayon, but we're still going to need to be careful, which works out fine because in landscapes, generally, the sky is going to be warm sunset colors or cool colors at night. So think for a moment about what you want to start with, and also consider where the lightest part of the sky will be in your landscape. It's usually going to be right along the horizon line, whether it's the rising or the setting of the sun that's making the skyline look, or the horizon line look like it's glowing. Even in the night sky, when you look at the horizon line, it's generally lighter than the sky is right above you in the dark. So we're going to be using that to our advantage as well. I'm going to start with sidewalk chalk because that's probably what most of us have at home, but I'll also show you the pastels just so you can see what it looks like. All right, I chose to do cool colors on this one, and in my sidewalk chalk I only have a purple and a blue. I don't have a lot of variations to the color, but the lightest of these two I would say is going to be my blue. I'm going to carefully go across or go around my mountain line. And this is not easy to do with these big bulky sticks of chalk, if that's what you're using at your house too, but do your best, and it's okay if there's some white lines. I'm going to show you what to do with that in just a minute. Do your best to get a line of this light color here. We're going to come back in a moment. We're going to blend it down. We want to be careful that we're not getting it on our mountains. That might be easier said than done with chalk right now. Add a little bit more. And then I want you to think for a moment, when you look at the sky, a lot of times when I see students doing these sky pictures, there'll be a strip of light blue, a strip of dark blue, and a strip of purple. And while the sky does have a gradient or a variant in those colors, it's not usually in straight lines. There's usually some atmosphere at play where the colors go off in these different angles, whether it's clouds or how the wind is blowing. So I like to work in a diagonal and not a straight line. This is just a little more true to nature. Now I'm going to go in with my darker color. I'm going to add some diagonal lines with it as well. I'm coloring neatly, but I'm going to come back and blend, so I'm not too worried about it. All right, so I have my colors. I'm going to go back now and press down a little bit more and get a little bit more of a variation in those colors. A little different value, a dark and a light. I like to have my darkest colors up near the top. I like for them to get lighter as they come down the hill. So now I'm going to take my finger. A Q-tip might work if you're working in miniature like this too. And I'm going to just start to blend these colors together. This is one of my favorite things about chalk, how you can blend them, you can layer them and make them darker. It's a little hard when we're working in miniature like this to get it around the edges, but it still happens. And when I've done that, I'll come back and look. I think that I need to add a little more purple down in here just for interest. I think you guys get the idea. Pretty quick and pretty fun. You don't want to blow on this. It's going to be tempting to blow this chalk dust off, but it'll just blow those fine particles back up in your face, and you don't want to bring that in. So you can just tap it. All right, then you're going to take your magic hairspray and just give it a little spray. It's going to look a little wet for just a few minutes, but it will dry back to its regular color, and this will just keep the chalk from spreading around. All right, but let me show you. Let me just demonstrate what it looks like with the chalk pastels. I'm going to start with my lightest color. Chalk pastels have more pigment in them than the sidewalk chalk will. So you're going to find that the colors are just really, really vibrant. All right, you want to protect your mountain down here from getting too much chalk on it, but if you get it around the edges, that's fine. Here's one last step that you could do. If we're in the art room together, I would have you choose your favorite out of your 4, cut it out, and then I would have you mount it on a piece of black paper like this. So framing is when you take a piece of artwork and you put something on top of it. Mounting is when you take a picture and you put it on top of your paper. So I could take a piece of paper, I could cut these edges off so it's nice and clean, and then I could mount it on here, and it just gives it it just really makes it pop from that, right? The same would be really true if you wanted to do one of your Valentines on a colored piece of paper to use it like a card. All right, I hope you enjoy that. Chalk is really fun to work with, even outside with the sidewalk chalk. Go out and try one of these landscapes on the sidewalk too. That would be really cool to see. All right, I hope you have fun with it. If you have time, send me a picture. Don't forget your fixative. I almost forgot it on this one. And I'll see you again next week. All right, let's talk watercolor. This is the medium that Miss Aranyi uses in her artwork, and it's one that works really well with this because the colors are going to blend and bleed together. It's a technique in painting and in watercolor. First, let's talk a little bit about colors. We have talked about color theory in the past before, about how colors side by side on the color wheel are analogous, and that there can be warm or cool colors. Warm colors being our red, orange, and yellows, cool colors being our blues, purples, and greens. That's important when we're dealing with watercolor and using a technique like bleeding where the watercolors blend on your paper, because cool colors will blend well with other cool colors and they'll just create more vibrancy. The same with warm colors. Warm colors will blend well with other warm colors and create a vibrancy. If you were to take a warm color and try to blend it with a cool color, you might possibly get muddy brown because the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, mixed together will actually make a very dark brown, almost a black color. So we want to keep our warm and our cool colors as separate as we can when we're blending in watercolor like we will be today, because that's going to create a muddy picture if we let them overlap too much or blend too much. So we're either going to be making a sunrise sunset sky with warm colors, or we're going to be making a nighttime sky with cool colors. Since you have 4 different pictures to use watercolor on, try a little bit of both. It'll be fun to experiment with. I'm going to do the same here. I'll try a little bit of both. I'm going to start by waking up my colors. I'm going to use warm colors for this one. So I'm waking up my yellows, my oranges, my reds. When you look at a sunrise or a sunset, you'll notice that the brightest part of the sunset is going to be along the horizon. So as the sun is setting or the sun is rising, the sun is right there along the horizon line. That's where you're going to find your brightest colors. But even in the night sky, you'll see that that's true. Oftentimes the horizon will be a little lighter than it is up higher in the sky. So we want to start by adding our lightest color along our mountain line. Anywhere that you put water with watercolor, it's going to draw the color to it. So I'm being very careful not to get any watercolor on my mountains. I want them to stay white, and I can feel pretty confident that it's not going to spread to my mountains because there's no water down here. I'm keeping it above that line. When you do your sky, think also about how the colors would naturally appear. One thing I see in a lot of landscape artwork is that we tend to want to make stripes of color, a yellow stripe and an orange stripe and then a red stripe on top. But if you look at the sunrise, the colors do blend, but they also sometimes shoot off at a diagonal when a cloud catches the sun or the atmosphere has a little disruption to it and there's more of these organic mixing of the colors. So all that to say, as you're adding colors, I want you to think in terms of diagonal instead of stripes. So here's this bleeding technique that I was talking about. I can add water to this line where my orange and my yellow meet, and it's going to make these two colors blend really nicely. I'm adding a few diagonals of this color. The more water I use, the lighter my color will be. The less water I use, the more that color will show up. Right now I'm going to add in a little bit of this red. It's pretty dark. Try a lighter red too. I'm letting my colors bump and bleed right beside each other. I'm going to come back. This red is pretty bright. I'm going to come back and just add water over the top. And you see how it just makes that color spread out, lessens its intensity. Oops. Add a little bit more here. All right, after you've kind of laid your colors in and you know where they're going to be, look back and see where you have too much of a bold line. I would say right here my line's a little too bold. So I'm going to go back with my lightest color and I'm just going to add it over the top. This is going to mix it just a little. It's kind of like mixing colors on my paper, which works with watercolor paper especially. And it just gives those colors depth. Now I don't just have red with orange, I have red and orange blending together. I still feel like this line right here is a little too pronounced. So I'm going to take a lot of water. I put color on my brush, I dipped it back in my water. I'm going to take a lot of water and add some water to the edges. One last thing you can do, you could take a little salt from your table, sprinkle it on wherever you would like to see some stars, and as it dries, the salt will absorb the watercolor and you can make kind of these constellations in the sky. So let the salt stay on until it's done drying and then you'll wipe it off and you'll have that look. All right, one thing that I would have you do if we're in the classroom together, I'd have you paint all your different scenes on your paper, and then I would have you choose your favorite. And your favorite would be cut out and mounted on a piece of paper. This is different than framing. When you frame something, you have your piece of artwork and then you set a frame on top. In mounting, you have your piece of artwork and you set your paper, or your piece of paper, I'm sorry, and you set your artwork on top and glue it down. This would be especially nice if you chose to do one of the hearts for Valentine's Day. You could cut out the heart and then mount it on to a different color paper to make a card. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I would love to see your pictures if you have time to send them to me. I'll see you next week.